Fordia is very excited to be partnered with The Guardian for today's Tackling Climate Change panel with 4 incredible expert speakers. Today, they will be tackling the solutions so we can all help address this crisis. So please put your hands together for the Tackling Climate Change panelists presented by The Guardian, Richie Merzian, Dr. Jenny Newell, Charlotte Connell, and Professor Ian Lowe.
Thank you, Maisie. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here. Before we kick off, I just want to add my acknowledgement of country to the beautiful Welcome to Country that kicked off Woodford. Welcome all of you this morning, including the elders who are joining us at the very back there. Welcome as well. I'm lucky to be joined by an amazing panel today to talk about how we tackle climate change. Before I introduce my panelists, I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Richie Merzian. I head up an organization called the Clean Energy Investor Group that invests in climate solutions. So those are the large-scale renewable energy projects that are going to transform our energy system. Alongside me, I have Charlotte, who is a climate tech expert, Professor Ian Lowe, who you might have seen at many of the other Woodfords as well, who is a resident climate expert, scientist, engineer. And finally, at the end, Dr. Jenny Newell, who is a climate curator at the Australian Museum and more broadly as well, heading up the Climate Solutions Centre there too. To make this session as useful as possible, we want to start with where we think the conversation needs to be. We're no longer talking about whether climate science is sound and sufficient to move forward. The science is settled. We're no longer talking about denial. The real culprit is delay. Slowing down climate action is where the problem is. And we need to be focused squarely on the solutions. How do we get the speed and scale necessary to transform our economy and to transform the world? That is what's going to keep us to 1.5 degrees or below of global warming. That's where we need to go. So we're going to focus on the solutions here and not the science, because we think that's what's going to empower everyone to actually tackle and solve the climate crisis. And we're very lucky to have experts in a variety of different fields here up on stage to take your questions and to also share their insights as well. So we will have a Q&A at the end of this session. So start thinking about what questions you might want to be asking. That'll be towards the last third of this session. And in the meantime, we'll kick off with what we think will be really useful to engage in this conversation and to give you substantive things to take away from it. But firstly, what are we talking about when we talk about climate solutions?
Actually, I would like to throw this to the audience. What comes to mind when you think of a climate solution or an innovative climate tech solution?
And you'll have to yell out, because this is the innovative part where we didn't actually have a roving mic there. EVs.
EVs. Can I see a hand for wind, solar? Yep. Whoa, there's lots. Okay. So I work across the climate tech ecosystems in Australia for Melbourne and Sydney and a lot in Queensland as well. Now, climate solutions in the tech innovation sector are incredibly broad and diverse, but they're also not conceptualized anymore. They're real. You can buy them. You can invest in them. And some examples are, and Australia is really world leading when it comes to climate tech. There's an incredible startup that came out of Canberra called Samsara Eco, which uses AI to break down the polymers of plastic to make plastic infinitely recyclable. You don't need to make any more plastic with this solution. If you're in Sydney and you're eating food and you throw your, those food scraps in there, there's a wonderful startup, again, out of regional Canberra, called GoTerra, that uses maggots to rapidly digest food waste. There's an incredible startup out of Newcastle called Cardinia Energy that uses printable solar panels so that you can have renewable energy anywhere, any place, anytime. Coldplay's recent tour was powered by those solar panels. So it is incredibly diverse. I mean, right now you could buy a burger from Grilled, which has been, the methane from the cows has been reduced because they're eating sea forest asparagopsis, which is a food additive to reduce methane. So climate solutions are incredibly diverse, and the ones that I work with are really about solving customer problems. There's customer demand, and they are rapidly scaling from Australia.
So the solution space is wide, and those are just some of the hard solutions. But as you said, it requires customer demand. So how do you also convince people to actually engage in this space? How do you educate them? How do you take them on that journey? What are the soft solutions as well? Jenny, that's your forte. Can you talk to some of the soft solutions to climate as well?
Yeah, thanks, Richie. Thanks, Charlotte. Very exciting stuff. It's really important for people to understand all the solutions that are out there and to see how they themselves can empower those solutions to come forward. So the climate solutions we often talk about, there's the tech solutions, but there's also the nature-based solutions, all the regeneration of wetlands that people are stepping up to. There's regenerative agriculture, there's community gardens being put in around cities, and you know yourselves, I know this audience already knows, all the good that can be done by those kinds of approaches in terms of reducing our emissions and reducing the carbon footprint of our food and looking after the soil, looking after other species. And then there's also community-based solutions. So all these communities that are coming together to create like a solar farm in their community, or coming together to share things instead of always buying. And so there's things like the Sydney Library of Things. There's lots of tool libraries around popping up. There's all sorts of repair cafes that people can go to, you know, just fix the things we've already got instead of always buying more. So all these things are hugely important for making sure that we're stepping forward to a more sustainable, more regenerative future. And we're also making sure that we're working together. So we're so much stronger together, and there's lots more community groups coming together now, whether it's Surfers for Climate Action or Parents for Climate Action, the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, Farmers for Climate Action. All these groups are getting bigger and bigger and doing such good work to get the messages out there that we need to hear, and getting those messages to our politicians, which is hugely important.
Thanks, Jenny. So a huge variety of hard solutions and soft solutions, and if you think about it, really the solutions are there. It's not that the innovation will continue, but to some extent the technology, we kind of know what we need to do. So the question is, why aren't we doing it? Where are we actually at in terms of deploying these solutions? Ian, most of Australia's emissions, and we're going to focus here on Australia. I mean, obviously climate change is a global problem. Australia is a major contributor, both in its emissions and also in its exports of coal and natural gas. But just focusing on Australia here, where are we at in terms of actually deploying these solutions and reducing our emissions, particularly in the energy space?
Well, we had 10 years of masterly inaction under a succession of coalition governments, Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison. And the election of the Albanese government promised new environmental laws and major steps forward. So far, the platform of masterly inaction, which worked so well for their predecessors, seems to have been adopted. And the critical thing is for government to set overarching targets. If we want to get to zero emissions by 2050, I think that means three things. Firstly, saying all electricity must come from renewables by 2035, and that means seriously investing in storage because the sun doesn't shine at night and the wind doesn't always blow. Secondly, setting a target for electrifying transport so that moves to using renewable electricity. And various European countries have recognised that since the average lifetime of a vehicle is about 15 years, if you want to get to zero emissions, you have to set a target earlier. I think 2025, which is only about 36 hours away, is the last year in which you can buy a petroleum-fuelled vehicle in the Netherlands. Various other countries have set dates between there and 2030. At the very least, it has to be 2035, after which you can no longer buy a petroleum-fuelled vehicle if you're going to phase them out by 2050. And the third point is we contribute twice as much to climate change by exporting coal and gas. And we must set a date beyond which we will no longer export coal and gas. I'd like to say 2035, but certainly not much later than that, because at the moment we are doing far more damage by exports than we are by even by driving Land Cruisers around to deal with the difficult terrain of suburban streets.
Can I just can I also add to that where Australia is positioned, that we had that decade of inaction, and we are in the decade of action. We have a lot of goals, ambitious ones to hit by 2030 in 36 hours and 5 years. But during that period, we also have the greatest rooftop solar penetration in the world. It's enviable. Like over 20% of rooftops in Australia have solar panels.
Well, maybe we do a quick straw poll here. Now, who here has solar panels on their roof?
Wow, congratulations.
That's solid. 1 in 3 houses in Australia, so that's a world record. And you can see why the strength here.
And I was told yesterday that there's an amendment to planning which will require new buildings that are predominantly used during the day, like shopping centres, office blocks, schools, university buildings, will require them to have on the roof enough solar panels to provide all their electricity. That just makes sense.
Good, solid solutions. And well, look, let's continue on the solution space.
And sorry, despite inaction from politicians during that time, we took action. There's market forces at work that it's no longer viable to be going for an industry that's kind of like the printer when we have a computer. So, I think it's disappointing, and there's a lot we can do collectively to advocate for change, but there's a lot happening despite it anyway, because this is the future.
And the old adage is, when the people lead, the leaders eventually follow.
That's right. So speaking of the people, let's do a quick round robin. What's one solution you want to see everyone in the audience take away here and activate? We know that they have solar panels. What's another solution that they can take away?
Shop locally. Huge amounts of energy are used bringing food and other domestic items from where they're produced to where they're consumed. If we try to eat local food, to support local producers of furniture, of clothing, that does a huge amount to reduce emissions.
Great. Shop locally. Who here shops locally? All right. It's about half the crowd. Jenny.
Talk to more people about your concerns about climate change, but more importantly, talk to more people about the solutions to climate change that either you see around you and you're really excited by, or the things that you're already doing. And that's just so inspiring for other people. And you don't even have to bring up climate change as the reason why you're doing something. If you've just bought an EV or you're aiming to buy an EV, it's your ambition. Talk to other people about that, because you can say, well, the reason why I want to get an EV is because it's going to give us cleaner air and it's quieter and it's such a nice car to drive. Just talk about all the things you can see around you that are solutions, and you'll bring other people along.
Just to support that point, the most important indicator of whether someone has solar panels on their roof is how many people they know who have solar panels on their roof. Good action, like bastardry, is contagious. Spread the good action.
Can I also...
Jenny, I think there's going to finish the point.
Just a quick little thing to wrap up on that, which I should have said, is the reason why talking to other people is really important is because a lot of you know that you're concerned about climate change, but if I asked you, so do you think, like, around you, out in your general community, do you think many people around you are also concerned about climate change? If you think they are, put your hand up. So there's some, but actually there's over 70%, well over 70%, it's now more like 75% of Australians want action on climate change now, but they're just not talking about that very much. We need to hear about it more from the people around us to recognise actually this is a very broad general concern and we all want action. So thanks.
Because it's become like religion and politics, right? It's not discussed around that. Well, it has been politicised, so in a sense it has almost become too political to talk about. So, to do that, how do we empower people to talk about it? Charlotte, you were saying something before.
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
The thing I would really love and encourage you all to do is there is a climate tech community which is online called Climate Salad. There are over 600 climate solutions from Australia on there. And these are, little backyard startups through to huge scale-ups, internationally scaling. Go on there, companies, startups need community, customers, and capital. So you're all potential connectors. Go in there and see who you can buy from, see who you can invest in, see who you can connect with. Because we have all the solutions we need. We just need to see them grow.
Can I throw in a point about that? 20 years ago, there was a report given to the Howard government, and of course the response was masterly inaction, as the Howard government response to most things was. But it said in 2003 that we could reduce our emissions by 30% using cost-effective existing technology that pays for itself in less than 4 years. So when your fridge dies, shop around for the most efficient one you can find. When your washing machine dies, shop around for the most efficient one. That's money in your pocket as well as less emissions in the atmosphere. Just improve the efficiency of using energy. As Amory Lovins famously said, people don't want energy, they want hot showers and cold beer. Find ways of getting your hot showers and cold beer that do less damage to the environment.
That's right. So who here, just picking up on Charlotte's point, who here has thought about investing in climate technology? It's probably what, like about 5% of the hands up, 5 to 10? And so that site that you were mentioning is called Climate Salad. Yeah? So go ahead and check it out. If you want to go ahead and open that up. The one I'll just add to this list here is also your superannuation, which is your big nest egg, which you can direct to make sure that it doesn't invest in the problem, because most index funds in Australia, most generic super funds will be investing in fossil fuel companies. Australia is arguably the third largest exporter of fossil fuels in the world, the third largest exporter of the problem. So who here has actually directed their superannuation to invest in climate, or to make sure it doesn't invest? It's about like a third, and including the camera. Great. Well, there you go. There's lots of different options out there. I'm not going to give financial advice from the stage, but a quick Google will give you a whole bunch.
And just on that, Richie, like one of the things that comes up a lot is, oh, we just don't have the capital, there's not enough money. Australia has the 4th largest pension pool in the world. So we are the global envy for rooftop solar penetration, and we're up there for our pension pool. And if only 1% of our supers was directed and invested into the solutions, that's unlocking $15 billion towards solutions. So even if you're at, your super isn't, maybe talk to them about these really great investments coming up, the solutions that will fuel the future.
Yep.
And if we're talking about unlocking billions, the Commonwealth Government now spends $11 billion a year subsidising the production and use of fossil fuels. Unlock that, turn that $11 billion a year into subsidies to accelerate the development of renewables and storage.
So, when it comes to having those conversations around how to make these changes happen, often people are faced with false solutions or disinformation. It's not enough to just be recognizing that there are solutions out there, but we actually need to be going in to barrack for them. So what do people need to know to do that? And I might start with you, Ian, with one of the most problematic ones right now, which is nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is a furphy in Australia. We all know it is. I don't think, who here supports nuclear energy? It's good. Nuclear energy operates in a number of other countries and successfully reduces their emissions by providing an alternative to fossil fuels. But who here supports nuclear energy in Australia? Few hands. Good. So let's have that conversation. You wrote the book on nuclear energy.
Yeah.
What do we need to know?
Well, there's two fundamental problems. John Howard appointed a committee which John Clark described as an independent group who all want nuclear power by Tuesday. And they reported on the prospect of using nuclear energy in Australia. And their two most important conclusions were that it would take at least 10 years and probably 15 to build one nuclear power station in Australia. And secondly, it would need very large government subsidies to make it look cost effective. And in the 15 years since then, the average cost of electricity from nuclear power stations has gone up by about 25%, and the average price of electricity from solar panels has come down to 1/10 of what it was then. So last year, world average prices of different forms of electricity. Solar 3.7 cents a kilowatt hour, wind 4.1, gas 8, coal 11, nuclear 16. So it's not just a bit more expensive, it's outrageously more expensive, even when you add in, as CSIRO has now, an allowance for the fact that nuclear power stations might operate for 50 years, and so the capital cost should be amortised over a much longer period than solar panels last. And even if you add in the fact that solar and wind require more distribution networks, it's still between 1.5 and twice as much money to provide nuclear electricity as to get it from solar or wind with storage. But the most important point is that we could not possibly do it in time to reach the target of zero emissions. If the coalition were to be elected and were to go ahead with their program of 7 nuclear power stations, and if, against all experience in the Western world this century, they were actually built in less than 15 years, that would provide about 5.5 gigawatts of the 100 gigawatts of electricity we need in 2040. So it's an expensive non-solution to the problem. It takes far too long, it costs far too much, and most importantly, in the short term, we would have to dramatically increase our carbon emissions because of all the steel and concrete and uranium fuel that's needed to fuel and operate a nuclear power station. So saying we have a plan, it's to go nuclear, is really saying, actually our plan is to keep burning coal and burning more of it, but don't tell anyone, because if they knew that, they wouldn't vote for us.
So to summarise that, it'll take too long, 15 years at the earliest, and by then we'll probably be very close to 100% renewable energy. It's expensive.
Yep.
It takes a lot of other resources that are scarce, including water. It's also uninsurable as well, which means that we'll also be insuring it and the public will pay for it as well, because I can tell you now, no private investor will touch nuclear energy in Australia.
Correct, and we're expected to believe that a coalition government that couldn't build railway station car parks can build and operate a nuclear power station. If you believe that, I want to know what you're smoking and where I can get some.
Watch out, someone will offer it here, yeah. Jenny or Charlotte, what do you think people need to be armed with as they engage in these conversations?
Oh, look, you know, and to Ian's point here, it's maybe hands up, who's anti-fossil fuel? Yeah. It's really easy to be anti something, and I know Jenny brought this up. I'm also on the board of Surfers for Climate, and we've taken a somewhat brave stance to actually be for renewables, because there is, again, misinformation that gets flooded into the market about offshore wind and solar, and I hear it when I'm in an Uber sometimes, like, oh, solar, that is the worst environmental disaster happening. Have you driven past an open cut coal mine? I think it's important that we start being really for the solutions and to be really understanding that climate innovations and solutions aren't perfect. They're not handed to us in this perfect form. We learn by doing, and we have to, reiterate, we have to help them along the way. So I think we have to be really brave and bold about being for the solutions rather than getting caught in the negative cycle of being anti, this is bad. But these incredible solutions are out there. Let's advocate for them. Let's buy from them. Let's invest in them. So,
Great.
Yeah, absolutely. Before the solutions. We also need to be for learning about what it is that we can do as individuals, as groups, as communities. And that takes a bit of energy and time, but being willing to actually put that in and invest in your own understanding of where we're at now in terms of the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis and where we need to get to and how. So that sounds big and complicated, but there are really great resources out there. You can look at the Australian Museum's website. You can look at books like How to Talk About Climate Change in a Way That Makes a Difference by Rebecca Huntley. You can look at the Drawdown agenda. So Drawdown is a really fantastic international consortium of innovators and scientists and experts of all sorts. who have just distilled down what the key solutions are and how we advance them. They're things like making sure we've got education for girls all around the world, that we've got access to really good, solid information about the climate emergency all around the world. And making sure that we've got that in Australia is really important. And so a lot of the kids are getting climate education through their schools, not all of them, some of them. But a lot of us adults don't get the education. We're getting a lot of weirdo misinformation through radio and TV and
Facebook,
Twitter. Yeah, exactly.
X.
Twitter, yeah. And that's just weird stuff. And what we need is them really putting just a little bit of effort into finding the good, reliable sources of information about what these solutions are, because we're not going to get them from the media, because of course the media wants all that, if it bleeds, it leads stuff. They don't want to tell the good stories because it's just, okay, so someone's just put in a fabulous new, a big wind generator, or they've put in, wave generator or something really exciting like that. They're not going to tell the stories about the community solar farms that have just been put in. So we don't hear about them. But actually finding out about those things, talking about them to other people, making sure we've got the information we need to respond effectively to the crisis is where we need to go.
Can I also add to that in For Surfers for Climate, one of our theory of change is actually to engage with and start a dialogue with conservative politicians. You get so much more done when you connect and you can find, you look after and you represent this coastal community. Guess what? We love the coastal environment as well. And we can find middle ground, and no one doesn't want jobs for their region. No one doesn't want a boost to the economy. And a lot of the climate solutions represent that, jobs and growth. And find me a conservative politician that doesn't like that. So there's always ways and familiar ground we can find. And it's hard when there is so much disinformation, because it becomes almost tribal, that, you're anti-wind farms and you're anti-this. But there can be connection there, because we all want our children to have a thriving, regenerative future.
That's damn right. We're moving to a subject now that I think it's about time we discuss head on, which is the politics of climate. Jenny, you were saying that it's not enough to support climate action. You have to actually educate on the latest and then advocate for it. Because the frontier of delaying climate action is now at our doorstep when it comes to solutions. Because the solutions are there, they're cost effective, they're working. A lot of them have them on our roofs or in our driveways or cooling our homes. And so the frontier now is about trying to spread disinformation, is trying to delay things, is trying to confuse people. So we actually need to become advocates for it. I'm based in Canberra, and we often joke that there's more jobs in Canberra in coal and gas than there is in the rest of the country, because of how many advocates are there lobbying daily for fossil fuel companies to delay the transition, to delay regulations that would tighten up emissions on vehicles or a whole variety of other laws. So what do we need to do to actually effectively engage in the politics of this issue?
Well, I think the short answer is to put the heat on politicians who are part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And given that major parties have lost seats like Kooyong and Warringah, which have been Liberal held since the Crimean War, and a Labor Assistant Minister lost Greenslopes to a Green candidate, any politician who can read and write and do joined-up writing and take away sums knows that there is no longer such a thing as a safe seat. There are community action groups all around Australia, and the one theme that they are unified on is faster action on climate change. So every politician, even those in what were historically rock-solid safe seats, has the fear of Gaia put into them by community action. Make sure that the politician in your seat knows that they are not going to get your vote unless they are serious about action on climate change.
Who here has reached out to their Member of Parliament about climate change, whether it's federal or state or local? All right. Who here is going to reach out to their federal Member of Parliament? Here we go. All right. what else when it comes to the politics? What do we need to arm people here to engage in the politics? Because part of the delay is politicising the issue so that it becomes heated, becomes controversial, people are unsure of how to move forward. What do people need to know in terms of the politics?
I think people need to know that their voice is valuable, as you've just said. I think joining an action group is probably one of the most important big first steps that someone can make. Looking for the climate action group in your community, or looking for the environmental action group. So it might be, Conservation Volunteers Australia, it might be Surfers for Climate Action, it might be Farmers for Climate. Parents for Climate are a really brilliant, broad, Australia-wide group, and they're really focused on making sure that real action happens. And so they've got all the tools there for helping you to write a letter, or for coming along to a march, or for rocking up in many different ways, wearing the T-shirt, making your own T-shirt, all those sorts of things that are really important for the micro messages to the people around you about the fact that the ground's shifting, the transition is happening, this is the new wave, get on board, as well as reaching up to our leaders with those more powerful letters and so on. So, groups like Climate Writers, there's one in Sydney, I don't know if there might be others around as well, that help you to write powerful letters and emails, those sorts of things to our politicians is really important. Thanks.
I think it's also important to recognise that any change has losers as well as winners, and to recognise that there's a community responsibility to have a just transition. I was looking at how Germany successfully phased out coal, and it was 3 strands: generous retirement packages for older workers, serious retraining for younger workers so they are equipped for jobs in the new industry, strategic location of the new technologies in the areas where the coal jobs were disappearing. And I think it's important in lobbying politicians to argue for a just transition rather than just change and let the devil take the hindmost.
I obviously work in the climate tech ecosystem, but 20% of climate tech companies are based in regional Australia. Over half of the capital they raise is from overseas, so it's got some good economic legs. And over 60% of climate tech startups have a female founder. So it's building this new economy that's more diverse, equitable, and a place where everyone can belong. So I always take it back to, this is about jobs for the future. This is about your regional area thriving. And in the resource sector, it's huge in Queensland, obviously, but Australia also has 55% of the world's lithium supplies here. So we can perfectly transform from being the coal leader to being the renewable energy superpower. And that's something we shouldn't miss out on. This is an opportunity that we need to grab a hold of.
Damn straight. Ian, you want another word?
Well, I was just going to add to that. I mean, the old fossil fuel industry, the jobs were localised. There's only a few areas where there's coal. There's only a few areas where there's gas. Good news, folks. Solar is everywhere. Sun is delivered free to every electorate in the country. Wind is everywhere. So changing to renewables is spreading the benefits of energy production and supply right around the country instead of it being concentrated in a small number of areas.
It's distributing the grid, it's distributing the power, which is quite powerful. The last thing to add is also just think about how you want to engage directly in politics beyond your vote. So obviously vote in a way that supports climate candidates, if that's what you want to do, but then how else can you support those candidates who are really being outspoken on climate? So whether that's the independents who've just got in the last parliament, and C200, which is the group that is helping to fundraise for them, or whether it's the Greens, or whether it's a number of other candidates out there who are spruiking climate. There are a number of good Labor candidates as well who want to actually see the party transition faster, but they're beholden to the fossil fuel interests within their own party as well. So how do you use your money, use your voice to actually engage in politics? Because it is a physical sport, and the more we engage, the more we'll get there. Before we turn to the audience for questions, so have a think about what you might want to ask the wonderful panel we have up here. I want to ask one last question of them, which is, what is the most exciting thing that you see on the horizon when it comes to climate solutions?
I think one of the most exciting things that CSIRO have demonstrated new technology for solar thermal. And the great thing about solar thermal is that it stores heat energy, which can be used either directly as heat or used to produce electricity after the sun goes down. And there's a pilot plant that's demonstrated the concept. They're building a scale model which is megawatts, and solar thermal has the potential to be both solar energy and storage in one, which is a huge leap forward.
Wonderful. Yeah, that gets some applause.
Go CSIRO.
Jenny?
I think it's the groundswell of people getting in on climate action that I'm seeing across Australia and around the world, but particularly in Australia. When I first became someone who was working on getting the word out about climate change through museums, it was quite a lonely space to be in, but there's now like so many people across our sector, but across all the different communities we're talking to, and places like schools and churches and RSLs, all sorts of different groups are starting to start these conversations in their own communities. And there's things like Climate Action Week. Sydney is now kicking off, and it's really exciting every second week of March.
Give it a bit of a spruik.
Bit of a plug, you've got to come. So Climate Action Week Sydney, we had a little pilot this year, and we thought we'd maybe get like 15 or so events, people putting their hands up to run events. We got 107, and so that was just a small start, but there was so much pent-up energy. You could see everyone was so keen to talk across sectors. So we had people from corporates, people from community groups, schools and multicultural groups and teachers, and everyone all talking and taking action in different ways. You're really innovative and exciting programs. So come to Sydney, second week of March, 10th of March is that week that it kicks off, and there'll be really exciting programs all around Sydney. But at the Australian Museum, of course, we're doing a wonderful set of programs for students, school students and leadership, and Climate Solutions Saturday, so come along for that. Richie will be there.
March
talking.
in March.
And Charlotte.
Yeah, and come to Greenhouse too.
Yes, of course, Greenhouse is awesome. It's the hub.
And doing a pre-event in Newcastle the month before. But for me, I think, climate tech wasn't even a term used 3 years ago. And now, last year, it was the sector in the Australian startup scene that had the most deals, 41 deals. Like, it took up the top amount of raises. I see that as, again, it's this groundswell of like, what even is it? And now it's like, oh my gosh, not only do I want to invest in, I want to jump on board. I also see that, as it's evolving, it's not just about these innovations anymore, but we're going to start to really value nature. 50% of our GDP relies directly on nature and the rest indirectly. And Australia has a world-leading advantage because we've had over 60,000 years of managing and looking after our land. And it's just, I'm so excited to see how we can incorporate that Indigenous traditional knowledge into these incredible solutions. It's like they've been there forever and they're just under the hood and they're just around us, but they're going to be the key to how we unlock a future that our people, our planet, and we can be prosperous in. So, yeah, I'm excited.
I'm going to take the liberty of being the moderator and say two. The first is that it used to be back in the day, the largest projects in Australia were coal mines or massive gas exploration and processing. My dad worked in the gas industry for 35 years, and those were the big nation-building projects from which the Australian economy, at least in rhetoric, benefited. These days, it's flipped. And they're huge renewable energy projects that are being built. One is in WA, which is about 3 times the size of the ACT. It is going to generate more energy than Australia generates through its electricity system right now. So the frontier is in the right solutions if we can get it there. So that's hugely exciting that the economics have changed, and that's where the government now is backing a whole concept called the Future Made in Australia, which is, can we not just turn the nation onto clean energy, but can we use that clean energy to power dirty processes that are happening overseas? Whether it's making aluminium or alumina or steel, we can take those processes that use coal and gas and we can use clean energy instead. And not only would we massively reduce Australia's emissions, but we could reduce the world's emissions by almost 10%. I think that's a huge change if we can get those solutions off the ground. And the second thing is COP31. Has anyone here heard of COP31? A few hands. So the Australian government, in partnership with Pacific Island nations, has put its hand up to host the world's largest climate meeting, the UN Conference of the Parties to the Climate Convention. This would be the biggest meeting that Australia's ever hosted outside sports, but more importantly, it'd bring the entire world here. About 40,000 people would come to Australia expecting to find a moral climate leader. I don't think the country has ever faced that kind of scrutiny to justify how it goes ahead and moves forward with climate than it will in that moment in November 2026. So I'm super excited to see Australia hopefully get that bid, because I think that'll be the moment, Ian, getting to your initial goal, where Australia will say once and for all, we're no longer going to open up new coal and gas, and here's the pathway to actually reduce it.
And just to underline that point, I go way back to COP2 in Geneva and COP3 in Kyoto, where Australia, day after day, was named Fossil of the Day, the country that is doing most to slow down action on climate change. So if the COP is held here, the scrutiny of the world will be on us, because we still have the COP out, which is known internationally as the Australia Clause, our proposal to inflate our baseline so we could look to be achieving emissions reduction by doing nothing. Make no mistake, if the COP is held here, the rest of the world will be really scrutinising us to see if we are no longer fossil of the day or fossil of the year, but actually part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
And to wrap that up, I'm just going to quote probably one of the most famous Woodfordians, who said in 1989 on World Environment Day, Australia's concern for the environment doesn't end on our shores. We'll be taking a lead in developing international conventions to address greenhouse gas emissions. So that was said by Bob Hawke on the first World Environment Day. That was the intention that the Australian government had, to actually play that lead role. It didn't end up panning out that way, but hopefully over the next couple of years we can finally turn that around. That's the aspiration.
And just to underline that point, under the Hawke government, COAG, the Conference of Australian Governments, adopted in 1992 a national strategy for ecologically sustainable development. So in principle, all our governments, Commonwealth and state and territory, Labor or coalition, are committed to the principles in that document. A pattern of economic development that does not reduce opportunities for future generations, striving for equity within and between generations, recognising the global dimensions of our actions, protecting our ecological systems, maintaining our biodiversity. Remind every elected politician that they are in principle committed to those wonderful principles, rather than driving the economy and hoping like hell that the environment survives.
All right. Now we can do questions. All right. All right. There's a few hands there. Look, wherever's closest to you, Mike, people.
Richie, there seems to be a serious problem with the rollout of large-scale renewables in rural Australia. People don't want it near them. People don't want power lines across, transmission lines across their properties. What's the industry doing to address these issues?
It's a great question. What I'll do is I'll take one or two more, and then we'll have a crack. So we get a couple, and there's just one behind you. And where's the other mic? Yep. And then we'll take one from there as well.
On the environmental issue, where do I stand as a remote area bushwalker, seeing more transmission lines in Snowy and Kosciuszko National Park, and the choice of, say, the pumped hydro? I understand it's needed. Oven Mountain, they're going to have to clear more national park to get upgraded transmission lines. Just being selfish and seeing more land clearing.
No.
Do I just shut up?
No, you keep talking. It's a good question, and we'll give it a proper go.
You started the session by referring to the international goal of 1.5 degrees. I think when we're looking at solutions, we need to understand absolutely what the challenges are. I understand the Bureau of Meteorology said we've reached 1.5 this year. Is that correct? And where are we heading? And unless we know where we're heading, we won't have any solutions.
Thank you. All right, we're going to take these three and then we'll get a couple more questions, and I think there's some people in the middle that we'll hit up next. Ian, do you want to, or does anyone want to have a crack first at the 1.5?
Well, we're already at 1.5 this year, and the current trajectory, we're heading for about 3 degrees, the consequences of which are just appalling. So that's why many local authorities in Australia have now accepted that we are in a climate emergency. This should be the highest priority action to slow down climate change, because we're already in serious territory. And that's the average increase in temperature. I mean, if you look at what's happening in Central Australia around Alice Springs, it's already about 2.5 degrees hotter than it was 100 years ago. We're looking down the barrel of significant areas of Australia being almost uninhabitable by the middle of this century unless we get urgent action. But I accept the point over there that the action needs to be environmentally responsible. It's not a good idea to destroy biodiversity to slow down climate change. I opposed Snowy 2.0 because of the transition lines through a national park. I don't think that's a very smart approach. That every solution has costs and benefits, and we need to look at every proposal with a harsh environmental light. We don't want to be destroying what remains of our biodiversity, because in the long term, loss of biodiversity is a more serious problem than climate change because it's irreversible.
I can tackle the next couple. Ian, I think you said it quite rightly. We need to do nature and climate at the same time. It can't be one versus the other, and we need to take everyone on that journey as well. We can't leave communities behind, whether they're the communities that are currently coal mining or coal reliant, or whether they're communities that are farming and are feeling like they're getting the raw end of the deal by seeing all these renewable energy projects pop up. We need to do both. Right now, it's the opposite is happening. So most renewable energy projects that have gone to the EPBC, which is the National Environmental Assessment Process, are still there from 2021. So it's taking longer to assess projects. It's taking, twice as long, in some cases even longer than that, twice as many conditions as well. So what we're seeing is we're seeing nature and climate not working collaboratively, and that's where we need to get things right. There's some good examples out there for what we need to do. So VicGrid, for example, which is a new agency that's been established in Victoria, is now rolling out transmissions, but properly in discussions with communities so that there's clear benefit sharing. In New South Wales as well, they've rolled out new community benefit sharing as well, so that they actually have farmers and communities on board with rolling it out. When there was a coalition government in New South Wales, they collaboratively and bipartisan agreed on renewable energy zones and how those would be mapped out. So there are ways that we can take everyone on that journey. We haven't done it right a lot of the time, and there have been some cowboys out there who have been doing it wrong that have really been making things worse. And there's also some disinformation and some opposition that's being fomented as well. It's a combination. But we need to get the nature and climate component right, and we need to bring everyone on that journey together. Because we need to put 10,000 kilometres of transmission if we want to build a fully integrated renewable energy grid. And the Snowy link is only 365 in New South Wales. And we need to get a lot of regional communities on board, because that's where most of the solar and wind's going to be built, along with storage and batteries, and there's still a long way to go to get there. Yep, go ahead.
How important is pumped hydro as a solution, particularly given the problems with Snowy 2? Would distributed small pumped hydro projects be both, efficient and effective, economically efficient, I think the ANU came up with a large number of sites, including using old mines as reservoirs.
Have you read Ian's book?
Or have other technologies really overtaken the need for pumped hydro?
That's a great question. Let's take another one in the middle. I think just there's a mic there. So whoever's closest there. And then maybe, sir, you can pass it behind you. There's another question there as well.
Thanks. And just in the same line of storage, but the opportunity of using the electric vehicles, which are going to grow, they have to, and use them as part of the storage solution, so the V2G, vehicle to grid connection.
The batteries on wheels.
What opportunities and potential do you see in that?
Yep. That's a great question. And then, yeah, just behind.
As has been confirmed or expressed very clearly today, the science is accepted and in. The economic case for transition to renewables is growing and very strong and growing economic case. There's broad, gradually increasing community interest and desire for change. So why are we seeing, what's the key reason and what we can do about it? We're seeing total political inaction, indecision, lack of leadership, no momentum or change. And we've seen this for quite a while.
Great. All right, we'll take these three and then we'll get to a few more. So pumped hydro, batteries on wheels.
Yeah.
Why the inaction?
I mean, pumped hydro, there's a famous study by Malcolm Stock, Ken Baldwin and Andrew Blakers at ANU that looked at powering Australia totally with renewables using pumped hydro as storage rather than batteries. And they looked around the eastern states grid. They identified something like 22,000 possible sites for small-scale pumped hydro, of which you would need to use the best 50 to have enough storage to power Australia totally by renewables. And that's why it's a realistic target to say we should be running Australia totally on renewables by 2035. And of course, you're right, if people buy electric vehicles, then they have the storage which can be used to power the grid overnight. It's not rocket surgery, as my friend says. It's the solution is pretty obvious.
Do either of you want to jump in on?
Oh, no, I think Ian has a great one for the
Yep.
action.
Well,
And the obstacle is the financial and political power of the fossil fuel industry. That they make large donations to politicians, and it's not out of philanthropy. You know, coal companies aren't charitable organisations. They would have to answer to their shareholders if their donations to political parties was not providing some tangible return. Anyone who thinks that companies give money to politicians just to have a warm inner glow like weeing in your wetsuit is seriously deranged. They're getting something back from it. And what we need to do, I think the most fundamental thing we could do is restrict political donations and prohibit fossil fuel companies. I mean, basically, if they give money to both sides of politics, they're backing two horses in a two-horse race, and we shouldn't be surprised that they have a winner. We should stop political donations from commercial interests, and that would do a hell of a lot to clean up politics.
And
Jenny?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also an issue with advocacy that there are, as you were saying, all these fossil fuel advocates in Canberra who just are in there every day. So Tanya Plibersek has fossil fuel advocates in her office almost every day. And that's what we're up against. We need to be really firm advocates too and be sending in those letters and phoning and meeting with her and other people who need to be met with. There's a lot that we can do to be the other voice to make sure that that there's a bit more balanced view of what the interests are out there in the Australian community, and making sure that if you are concerned about an issue, that you're actually making sure your local member knows about it.
And engage in all sides of politics, not just the ones who are vocally for climate action. But I think we have to go a long way to engage the entire political spectrum and move it more towards action, because you're right, like for every environmental lobbyist, there's 11 coal lobbyists.
Richard Dennis makes the point that the coal industry employs more than 1,000 people in Canberra. There's not many coal mines in Canberra. They're not digging up coal, they're digging up politics, they're digging up influence, they're digging up policies that are slowing down the transition.
All right, as we grab a few more questions, just the last one, just on the vehicle to grid as well. Currently, the setup isn't there for vehicle to grid to really work in a proper way in Australia. It can be, but it's not currently set up that way. Another solution will be for people to just get batteries for their homes. We're seeing more and more of these rebates come out. The price is going to come down. So adding that to the list as well. The vehicle to grid, what you'll find is that there'll be a whole bunch of companies that don't even activate that on their vehicles as well. So it's a whole variety of solutions to distribute the grid and distribute that storage. Is there a question there?
Yeah, thank you very much. This is more like asking about a bit of advice, like what else we can do when calls go unanswered and when letters, you never get a reply, because where I live down in Benalbo, just like outside of Lismore, we've been planting trees and there's nesting southern sugar gliders and, you know, yellowtail black cockatoos and koalas everywhere, but our property backs onto the state forest and forestry is up there, like tearing shreds through the state. Like they leave a mess. You know, like what else can you do? Like stopping short of sabotaging their equipment and, you know, getting into trouble.
And locking on, yeah.
Like, you know, we're planting trees and they're up there just a couple of minutes up the road, ripping them all down. I mean, you know, we call nature conservation groups. We've had Indigenous rangers from Lismore come and help us actually plant these trees, but I mean, it seems kind of pointless because, you know, so what else?
Yeah.
I'm 13, so what would someone my age be able to do to help with climate change?
Great question. All right, and then, yep, one up there, yep. And then maybe just that one there, yep.
Thanks. I remain hopeful. I don't know if I share your optimism regarding the COP. I mean, this year was held in Azerbaijan. Last year was held in the United Arab Emirates. We seem to be joining a fossil producers club where oil executives make deals on the sidelines of international climate change negotiations. So I'm wondering whether we can look for leadership, real leadership elsewhere, and whether we look for that in our neighborhood in the Pacific, whether we look for that, the leadership of First Nations organizations, youth organizations like Seed Mob, and also to look to other international examples, such as Ecuador, which changed its constitution to give rights to nature, New Zealand, which gave rights to the Wanganui River as a legal entity under the guardianship of the Wanganui iwi, and what roles those kinds of examples can show us to move outside of a growth-oriented Western framework that's not working anymore.
Great question. 2 minutes left. All right. Well, so this is probably going to be the last round. Sorry, folks. This is the last round, but maybe if we're not in a rush, we can stick around for a little bit after at the front, and you can come have a yarn. So apologies, folks. I think that might be where we have to call it. But let's answer those three. So what do we do when we feel like we've done it all? What can you do if you're 13? And are there better forms of leadership out there apart from the fossil-fueled presidencies of the COPs?
All really big and important questions. I might go to our 13-year-old friend first. Thanks so much for being committed and wanting to actually step up in this way. This is really powerful. Even just making that decision that you want to do something is already going to make a shift, not only for you, but your friends and your family around you. So well done. There's all sorts of things that someone your age can do, which are super powerful. And I went to a really brilliant talk yesterday by Costa and Dirt Girl, and they were saying that actually young people often have more pushing power than the grown-ups, because people are really going to listen to you. You've got a perspective that we don't have. You've got moral authority that we don't have, and you've got innovations and creativity that is really new. So you'll be able to come up with fabulous things. Think about one term that they came up with, which I really liked, is narrowcasting. So telling your story and the things that you're concerned about and the things that you're seeing to the people around you, making even like little videos that you can send to your grandparents, to your friends, put up on YouTube if you're able to do that. Those stories are super powerful, and you'll be able to show people what's going on around them, show people what needs to happen, and you're a really important voice. You can also do lots of practical things in your own back garden with planting. You can support the local bush care groups, the local environment groups. See if there's river keepers in your local area who you can support. All sorts of great things you can step up to as a young person, and you'll be really influential. It's really heartbreaking hearing about trying to protect forests that are really hard to protect, and I think continuing to fight that battle and continuing to speak and find more people around you who can continue to write those letters and step up. And I mean, I'm not going to speak to direct non-violent action. It's not something I've stepped into myself, but I know there's people who could advise on that, whether it's Greenpeace or others. But there's, we all need to step up to fight to protect our forests. So yeah, well done for all the planting you're doing and for the fight you're fighting.
It's such an interesting space because the nature repair market is being launched in 36 hours in January 2025, and there's methodology approved for a degraded land to regenerate, to plant those trees, but there isn't for any protection or preservation, so we don't have a value for that yet. And it's like, oh my God, we don't have a value for preserving what we have yet. So it's not perfect. We need to engage with it and help this market be meaningful. But I just have to echo what Jenny says. You need to find community, and the antidote to despair is action. So don't ever give up.
Absolutely. The American environmental scientist Gus Speth said that he thought 30 years ago the most important problems were climate change, loss of biodiversity and ecosystem collapse. And he thought with 30 years of good science, we could attack those problems. He said, I now recognise the most important environmental problems are greed, selfishness and apathy. And doing something about that requires a cultural and spiritual transformation. And that's really the responsibility of all of us. If you think about the big changes throughout human history, like getting rid of slavery or getting the votes for women, they didn't come from visionary leaders. They came from small groups in the community, talking to their friends, talking to their family, talking to their neighbours, creating a tsunami of opinion that swept the politicians away, swept the old way of thinking away. We all have a duty to be talking to our friends and our family and our neighbours and creating that cultural and spiritual transformation that recognises that our most fundamental duty is to protect the natural systems on which we critically depend.
And finally, just for the 13-year-old friend, join a group like the Australian Youth Climate Coalition or other groups where you can be with other 13, 14, 15-year-olds who also want to do change. That'd give you the community that can help you. And on the COP question, you're right. There have been these fossil fuel presidencies and they've done a terrible job in terms of how they've used their mantle. But at the same time, they would have never faced that pressure if they hadn't actually been in that position, because the UAE is still making those deals, or Azerbaijan is still making those deals. So it just brings a level of accountability and transparency they've never had to face before, these autocracies. If we only had it in Ecuador and Denmark, then we wouldn't actually get the kind of incremental, slow-moving, but all that important change that diplomacy provides. Because at the end of the day, we need to get 200 countries to agree by consensus on how to move forward. And if we host it, it'll be in partnership with the Pacific. And the Pacific leaders have all signed up because never have they had the opportunity to bring that much scrutiny, that much power to bear. So that's what really excites me, the fact that the Pacific, who need 1.5 to survive, will now hold the reins alongside Australia. And if you think Australia can get away with it, then just put 14 Pacific Island countries next to it and see how they go. That's what excites me. Thank you everyone so much. Please give a round of applause to the wonderful panelists. Thank you for coming along. We hope you leave this feeling empowered. We'll be sticking around at the front, so please come and say hi if you want to, and have a great Woodford.
Woodford, can we please give it up for our expert panelists? We are so lucky here at Woodford to hear from such knowledgeable speakers, so please go and ask them your questions, and I'm sure they have much more knowledge to share. And a big thank you to The Guardian for partnering with Woodford, and if you are looking for something to read under a tree, you can sign up for The Guardian's digital subscription just at the general store. All right, guys, stick around. We've got an incredible act next.